Now let's proceed to the social context. Concerning the social picture of the 19th century Philippines, at least 3 topics are needed to be discussed: education, the rise of Chinese mestizo, and lastly, the rise of the Inquilinos.
Education in the 19th century. With the coming of Spanish colonizers, the European system of education was somewhat introduced to the archipelago. Schools were established and run by Catholic missionaries. The first formal schools in the land were the parochial schools opened in their parishes by the missionaries, such as the Augustinians, Franciscans, Jesuits, and Dominicans. Aside from religion, the native children were taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and some vocational and practical arts subjects. Aside from the Christian doctrines, Latin, which is the official language of the Catholic Church, was also taught to the students instead of Spanish. The Spanish friars believed that the natives would not be able to match their skills, and so one way for the locals to learn fast was to use strict discipline, such as applying corporal punishment. As a result of the growing number of educated natives, a new social class in the country emerged, which came to be known as the Ilustrados. But despite their wealth and education, the Ilustrados were still deemed by the Spaniards as inferior. Out of this talented group of students from the Philippines arose what came to be known as the propaganda movement. This was Jose Rizal, who inspired the craving for freedom and independence with his novels written in Spanish.
Next is the rise of Chinese mestizo. At the beginning of the 19th century, economic and political changes in Europe were finally starting to affect Spain and consequently the Philippines. Significant as an impetus to broader trade was the gradual abolition of the monopoly enjoyed by the Manila-Acapulco galleon. Upon the elimination of the galleon trade, Manila became open to foreign merchants almost without restriction by the mid-1830s. The demand for Philippine sugar and abaca or hemp grew swiftly, and the amount of exports to European countries increased even more after the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869. In a larger perspective, the fast rhythm of the economic progress in the Philippines during the 19th century, expedited by some mentioned factors, resulted in the rise of a new breed of rich and influential Filipino middle class. Non-existent in earlier centuries, this class, composed of Spanish and Chinese mestizos, ascended to a position of power in the Philippine society and in due course became leaders in education and finance. And lastly is the rise of the Inquilinos. At least in modern Spanish, the term Inquilino has the same meaning as the English tenant. Contextually, the 19th century Inquilino system in the Philippines is better understood as a qualified system of tenancy or the right to use land in exchange for rent. As earlier explained, the elimination of the galleon trade and the opening of the Suez Canal gave way for more intensive rice cultivation and production of crops such as sugarcane and tobacco. Consequently, many estates turned progressively to the Inquilino system of land tenure. But since the friars and secular Spanish were normally absentee landlords, estate management was granted to an administrator who was typically a lay Spanish mestizo or Filipino lay brother. During the harvest time, the administrator would collect the rent of the Inquilinos, organize the delivery of the harvests to the local market or to Manila, and remit the income from sales and rents to the estate owners. In some estates, though, these farm duties were consigned to trusted Inquilinos. Acting as overlords, some Inquilinos would make innumerable and irrational demands from farm workers. As friar estates enlarged, outlining the boundaries that separated these estates from communal lands became a common cause of conflict. There were also conflicts between estate owners and workers. These stemmed from collection of excessive taxes and land rent, the decline of sharing agreements, extreme demands for labor services, and capricious fixing of crop prices. Consequently, there were instances of peasants taking arms to protest the alleged abuses and usurpation of their lands by the Jesuits, Dominicans, Augustinians, and the Recollects. The relative freedom which the Inquilinos acquired by subleasing their farms provided them a tactical advantage for arranging and leading these peasant protest movements.
The political landscape, the so-called political influences affecting the 19th century Philippines largely impacted the locals, particularly Jose Rizal. Under these political influences, worthy of mention are liberalism, the impact of the Bourbon reforms, and the CADIZ constitution. With liberalism, what is it? Liberalism is a worldview founded on ideas of freedom and equality. It includes a wide range of political philosophies that consider individual liberty to be the most significant political goal and underscore individual rights and equality of opportunity. Liberals normally believe that government is necessary to protect individuals from being abused by others, though they are also aware that government itself can pose a threat to liberty. Second, the impact of the Bourbon reforms. When the Spanish Bourbon King Philip ascended to the throne, he and his successors Ferdinand VI, Charles III, and Charles IV advocated a century-long effort to reform and modify the Spanish Empire. These policy changes, known jointly as the Bourbon reforms, endeavored to curtail contraband commerce and reclaim control over transatlantic trade, restrict the church power, reform state finances to fill dwindling royal coffers, and found tighter administrative and political control within the empire. Third, the CADIZ Constitution.
The Constitution established Spain as a robust state under the rule of law, a united and indivisible nation in which legal certainty was indisputable and people's rights and freedoms were a reality. Spain was established as a parliamentary monarchy, a nation with 17 autonomous communities and 2 autonomous cities. The Constitution recognizes the right of autonomy of nationalities and regions, and thanks to this, Spain has transformed itself into a highly decentralized country, whose autonomous communities manage their own education, health, culture, and social assistance, among many other areas. The Constitution also recognizes Spanish diversity, designating Spanish as the official language throughout Spain and the other languages of Spain as official languages in specific territories.
The constitutional monarchy that the CADIZ Constitution attempted to put in place did not come to fruition because in May of 1814, King Ferdinand VII declared it invalid and restored absolutism. However, CADIZ was a very significant period in the political history of the Spanish-speaking world at least. On the part of the locals in the Philippines, one crucial creed embodied in the Constitution was the exemption of the natives from paying tributes and rendering public services based on its equality clause. For the freedom-loving people of the Philippines in the 19th century, the Constitution was very influential as it was a liberal constitution which vested sovereignty in the people, recognized the equality of all men and the individual liberty of the citizen, and granted the right of suffrage. In various social sciences, it is a widely accepted principle that we see the life of an individual in his or her society, and society in the life of an individual. This is precisely the reason that 19th century Philippines as a Rizal society is discussed here as a preliminary in studying the hero's life and works.